welcome. And we're going to, of course, go back to Genesis this morning because that's what we do on Sunday mornings. And I am going to go ahead and make the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And there we go. You can see it now. It seems to take a few seconds for the screen share to actually appear, which is something that is most recent. In the past. It used to come up pretty quickly, but it isn't anymore. Oh, well. So we're still dealing with this verse here. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the verse just to refresh our memories on this verse. And we are actually talking about the creation of human beings. And so here it goes. Vayivra Elohim, God created et ha'adam betzamo, the man in his image. B'tselem Elohim bara'oto, in the image of God he created them. Notice the sort of poetic repetition there. Zachar unkeva bara'otam, male and female, he created them. So here we go. B'tselem Elohim bara'oto. So that's this verse here, this part of the verse. In the image of God, he created him. Piresh lacha. So I think what Rashi is trying to do is explain this repetition and to understand it as a clarification, right? So this is the verse, in other words, is the subject of this, explains to you or specifies to you she'otot tselem, that this particular image, mitukan lo, was prepared for him. Tselem dioken, right? Yotzrohu. It is the image of, well, dioken really means like icon. You see the word icon in the word dioken? It's a Greek, a Hebrew borrowing from the Greek, yotzrohu, of his creator is he. So when it says that image of his creator, it doesn't necessarily imply that God has an image, but rather that it was the image that God had in mind for human beings when God created them. In other words, that it was perhaps, if I could put it this way, sort of a more planned idea than, say, the creation of the other life forms or the world itself, the innate forms of physical forms of this world. That there was that God gave it, if one could say such things, a great deal of consideration when man was created. And I think poetically and literally, that is supposed to convey to us maybe a greater sense of responsibility. And because part of what I think our religion tries to do, and I think this would apply to any religion, except obviously I'm a novice and not an expert on other religions, but is to try and help us understand better, and you've heard me say this before, our relationship to the universe. What is our place? And to say that this image God had in mind, even before the universe was created, if we could say that, sets a certain kind of responsibility, I might put, on what human beings are all about. And trying to understand what we are all about, I think, is a very essential part of what it is to be religious. That very activity of taking a step back and look and sort of putting us under the magnifying glass, looking at what it means to be a human being. That's a great enterprise on the part of humanity. And I think the arts, for example, the various arts try to approach these things. It's not a subject that you can simply answer in a straightforward, linear kind of way. I think it is something that involves, well, I could say every element of who we are as human beings, and in using all the elements that we can that we have at our command or that we can develop as we mature is this amazing part of what it is to become a human being and to give us purpose and significance and things like that. Zachar und Keva ba'otam, male and female, he created them. Ulahalan hu omer. So, and later on, he says, this is of course in the Torah, Vayikach echad mitzal otal v'gomer. And he took, this is in the next chapter where the description is of the specific, where we have the first case of surgery under anesthesia, right, where God makes Adam sleep and then takes, according to one translation, one of his ribs and forms the woman from it. I have mentioned before that the word Selah, in the context of the creation of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, which we're going to come up into very, very soon in our regular sessions, can also mean side, one of his sides. So to understand Adam as androgynous, as basically the human being, both male and female, right? So the Midrash Agadah, right, in the Midrash, in the Agadic in Midrash, that Shebar O Shnei Partsufim. So this is in Midrash Rabbah, that God created man initially androgynously. In other words, with two faces, literally, back to back. And Bri'ah Rishonah, the very first time. In other words, the fact that there are two creation stories associated with the creation of human beings is that the distinction is that the first time, because it says male and female, he created them, that the initial creation was male and female with their backs to each other. And v'achar kach chelkam, and after that, he divided them. He divided this male-female creation. And what's lovely about that Midrash, it says he did that in order to bring them, to make them capable of looking at each other face to face. And again, I think that's very poetic and is suggesting the need for males to look at females and understand where they're coming from, and vice versa. Vice versa. That there's a need to understand what makes masculinity tick and femininity tick, and see if they can harmonize and blend together, work together in harmony. Upshuto shall mikra.
I had a question.
Yes, sure. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand raised. Yes.
No, that's okay. It's okay. So this is probably obvious, but I mean, is this really where the concept of soulmate comes from? In the sense that, originally we have, basically we're combined male and female. Now, Hashem divides us into male, separate male, separate female, but yet we still seek somebody to, combine with, or, our soulmate, because that puts us back together as male and female, right? I mean, right. I'm sure that's it, but is this the earliest where this comes from?
No, I would say that the locus classicus of that is where he says, where God later on says, I shall create an Ezer Kenegdo, a helpmate, where God actually declares that in the Torah, that the intention is to bring the man and the woman together later on, and this precedes the creation of Eve in that second story. But I would say that you're pulling that out, extracting it from what we're saying here, totally supports that notion. Okay. So I would see it more as a good support of that, without necessarily being the initial expression of it.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. And by the way, something else too. So for example, I personally, telling you the open about this, is that I happen to like and want to support the initial expression of prayer, and that when I think of patriarchs, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, I don't think of them in the context of the prayer simply as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And even though I may be referring to them as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they would not be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for me without Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And I could extend the discussion further, but hopefully what we just read here helps you understand at least my rationale for wanting to go there without suggesting superiority, etc. And just because something isn't named explicitly does not mean that it's being ignored or neglected. After all, God, the way in which God manifests himself in creation has to do more with how we, gives us that opportunity to discover and to, in the words of Isaiah, to lift up our eyes and see who created these. But it's not like we see God in an obvious kind of way. It only becomes obvious when we've processed it ourselves. So I'm not saying I expect everyone to agree with me. I'm just trying to explain at least my rationale. And it's based on statements like this.
And I have a comment
Please,
too. That
sure.
when I chant the Amidah, I feel the same way. Avotenu means our ancestors.
Right, exactly.
Because Hebrew is a male language, it doesn't mean that it doesn't include more than what is just written.
Right. I really appreciate that, Lisa, and I appreciate the way you're expressing it. And I've sensed it from what you said. But I will tell you that I repeated out loud to use Imotenu, or at least the matriarchs, because I want to be respectful of the congregation and their feelings about it. And I don't want to have to explain myself every time. So, out of respect for the community I'm in, I want to go there. So hopefully I'm not a hypocrite as a result of that. At any rate, I understand where people are coming from, and if they don't necessarily understand my own rationale. So going on, Upshuto shel mikra, Pshuto mishel mikra, comma. There are no commas, so sometimes excuse me, I don't remember the punctuation, and I appreciate your bearing with me on that. So the simple meaning, right, of this scriptural text of scripture here, Odiacha, he lets you know, he's telling you, Shenivru Shnehem, that the two of them were created, Bashishi, on the sixth day. So Rashi's accepting the fact, or at least maybe he's even siding on a side that doesn't necessarily accept the midrashic interpretation, and it's ambiguous, right? But so he's saying the point here is that both Adam and Eve were created on the sixth day, v'lo piresh lecha ketzad briatam, without simply explaining, not explaining exactly how they were created. So let me clarify. I'll just finish the sentence, but then I'll clarify. And elsewhere, in a different place, he explains to you. In other words, that he's supporting the idea that of the possible interpretation of surgery in the sense of the rib being taken from Adam, although it doesn't even matter. It could still support the idea of them being androgynous. So he isn't necessarily going against that, because he's simply saying that ultimately the two were created on the sixth day. That is, that Adam and Eve were created. All this took place on the sixth day of creation. The narrative that's mentioned in the second chapter, which goes into the details of Adam and Eve's creation, but so that there's not a contradiction. So as I'm thinking this through, it doesn't and as long as we're saying that Eve came from Adam, whether we want to say Eve came from Adam's rib, and there's a reason there for that. In other words, if we look at this again, I go back to looking at it from a literary point of view, and the rib being close to the heart, not saying that woman is somehow inferior, right? I think that's such it's not helpful in any kind of way, because I think it's a partnership. And a partnership doesn't mean, that you're both doing the same job. It's saying that you complement each other. So I think the idea of the rib, honestly, has to do with closeness to the heart and the emotional tie. So it's a clearer explanation of the emotional tie that a loving couple should have. So going on. All right. So we'll do the next verse now, and this is going to open up, I'm afraid, possibly a can of worms. But I actually did a little bit more research, and while we won't do the Torah Tamima in full, it's a very long Torah Tamima. I will try and summarize how the Torah Tamima understands this. But let me stop speaking in mysteries and get into this. All right. So, Vayvarech otam Elohim, God blessed them. By the way, so here we go. Look at what we mean when we say blessed. Vayomer lahem, he said to them, Elohim, that is, God said to them, Pru urvu, be fruitful and multiply, umil'u et haaretz, and fill the earth, right? Populate the earth, vekiv shuha, and subdue it. This word, and subdue it, is going to give us the can of worms, because Rashi's going to point out that in the Torah, there's no vav, which is the plural suffix, right? So it could be kivsha, subdue her, singular. So we'll see. We'll see how we go there. I'm raising these issues now, okay? But notice that blessing means plenitude, right? Having lots of. Urdu, and rule over bidigat hayam, over the fish of the sea, uve'of hashamayim, and the birds of the heavens, uve'chol haya haromeset, and all the creatures that creep, right? Creep al ha'aretz, over the earth. Doesn't say rule woman, right? It does say rule over these particular things. But subdue, it's hard to say. Lichbosh, right? Has to do with, overcoming or having control over or something like that. And here we go. And I'm going to ask you to be as open-minded as you can. And you know where I'm going on this, I suspect. And we'll try and, I don't know, if we don't finish it today, we'll try and pick it up next time. So he says, chaser vav. It's written omitting this vav. Lelamedcha, to teach you, shehazachar kovesh et hanekeva. Okay, so this is I'll explain that the male has power over the female, shelo tehe yatzanit, that she should not be I guess the word we'd say is gadabout. In other words, there's a sense, this is all, here you're getting some background now. So for example, why Muslim women, for example, will either veil themselves or cover their hair. And of course, covering your hair is a Jewish tradition as well, for a woman to cover her hair. But in Muslim countries, perhaps go even further, right? So as not to attract other men. Okay, so this, a yatzanit, means a woman who goes out in the streets. And the idea that there is something immodest about that. And I think we have to try and contextualize that a lot, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you don't go grocery shopping and stuff like that. I think it means, going and socializing with other men, okay? And again, I'm not saying that I can just sit back and leave that alone. I'm just trying to work this through. And also to teach you, shahaish darcho lichbosh, okay? And that it is for the man, okay, to have that kind of control, Mitzuve al Piria Verelia. This is going to be interesting. I think you're going to find this interesting, that because it is the man's responsibility, and I think it's got to do here with the idea of the man initiating, right? Somehow initiating the on a physical level, because I don't think you can say it on an emotional level, but in a physical level, the act of procreation. So mitzuve al priya veria, and for this reason, a man is commanded regarding being fruitful and multiplying, the lo ha'isha, and not the woman. Let me tell you specifically what this means. It means that traditionally, if in an observant family, a woman is permitted to use contraception, and a man is not permitted to use contraception. And what's really interesting and actually progressive, right, is the notion that contraception is an acceptable act, that the woman is totally allowed to do that. And by the way, that's one of the things that the Torah T'mima gets into, that it's not an issue of, well, the one is a biblical commandment, that the man is biblically commanded, whereas the woman is only rabbinically commanded. And he tries to clarify that. And it doesn't, because if the woman was rabbinically commanded for this mitzvah of Priya Verivya, meaning to be fruitful and multiply, in other words, procreation, then it would still be forbidden, right? It's just not forbidden in the sense of a biblically commandment. And he shows that it's not, that it's completely permissible for a woman to practice contraception. And he also goes on to say that lichbosh, to subdue, right? Whatever this, we're going to understand this, actually has nothing to do with subduing a woman, that we should not understand it that way, that what the interpretation of lichbosh here has to do with the earth. In other words, he's saying, look, it says, fill the earth, right? Populate the earth and subdue it, meaning, guess what? Subdue the earth. In other words, you want to, become, how can I say, caretakers. And also the fact that we use the earth, we're able to utilize the earth in this sense of subduing it, of making it capable of supporting a population, and not the woman. It's not saying subdue the woman. And the Torah T'mima is very clear about that. And I think he is compelling, because that's what it's referring to. The land, ha'aretz v'kivshuha. So the kivshuha has to refer to the aretz, and saying that it is the man's responsibility to do this. And again, I'm summarizing a great deal what he has to say. And I think this is a good place then for us to stop. And I want to give you just a little time, please, if you want to go on record and respond to the issues that I raised today in our Rashi.
I can hardly wait till next week.
Well, do you have a moment to comment now? I want to go on record. If you don't want to go on record, I understand.
No, it's not about that. I'm so excited about the way all of this is being presented, and the opportunity to just be so expansive that it's true. I can hardly wait till next week. I didn't have any other things attached to needing to say anything today. Thank
Okay,
you.
okay. All right, fine. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything at this point before I stop the recording? I'll stop the share, and notice I'm still recording. So, okay. All right. I'm assuming there are other comments for the record. Okay, I'm stopping the recording.